Welcome to NPC Overrider, where we challenge mainstream source code to develop independent thought, one user story at a time.
I worked as a pizza delivery driver years ago. It wasn't a bad gig. I spent most of my shifts cruising around town listening to music, Rush Limbaugh, or maybe All Things Considered on NPR. I achieved a decent daily step count and they paid well. What made for a good run varied. Some places were close, some were far. Sometimes it was 70 and 75, and sometimes I got my Saturn stuck in the snow. Sometimes the customer was ready at the door. Other times, not so much, especially at hospitals, businesses, or campus buildings, which could easily waste 45 minutes of my shifts while I hunt down nurses, executive assistants, or faculty members. But even on the most challenging delivery, there was hope that the customer would make up for it with a generous tip. Unfortunately, there were certain customers who, regardless of service or weather conditions, would not provide gratuity. We just weren't allowed to talk about it. After working at multiple restaurants for multiple years, I noticed a pattern with the customers. Unfortunately, articulating that observation would likely get me fired. Of course, drivers of color were free to point out this pattern, but society had programmed us white employees to keep our mouths shut. The dirty secret? Most black people don't tip. That's right. Of course, it wasn't all black people. Sometimes black customers were the highest tippers of the shift. Some even told me that they tipped extra intentionally just to make up for the other black people they knew were stiffing me. But why? One might assume income levels are to blame, yet poor whites in the trailer park tipped regularly. Was that my white privilege at play? I doubt it, considering upper-class white people in 4,000 square foot homes had no problem stiffing me before slamming the door in my face while whistling the Frasier theme song.
How rude!
Since black drivers complained of not getting tips from black customers too, I didn't think my skin color was a factor. However, some people suggested the practice of gratuity was, quote, rooted in racism. To understand this fully, we're going to have to go back to the Tudor period. Tipping has been around since about the 1500s, where it originated in Europe, back when masters would give extra wages or gifts to servants when they went above and beyond. This could have been to incentivize quality service, to quell potential dissent, or maybe it was just plain generosity. In years later, it became customary for guests to provide money known as vails to hosts, which was then divided amongst the servants. Eventually, the practice got out of hand and it became too expensive for people to visit anybody, which led to public debate. When royal families met in Scotland in the 18th century, they agreed to abolish the practice, saying the resolution should be to raise wages. Of course, nobles didn't agree entirely, and the controversy even led to riots in the streets. Masters and visitors were also split on the issue, making for awkward moments where neither visitor nor host knew where the other stood on tipping. Many would offer the gratuity to play it safe in hopes that the host would refuse. Aristocrats like Lord Sefton outright banned the practice on his estates, even placing notices around the property stating no servants should receive a tip. Still, the custom survived throughout Europe, with many countries varying in what they expected. It's widely believed also that later pubs would put boxes out on the bar with a sign on it that said to ensure promptitude or to ensure prompt service, which was later abbreviated to tip. Although a widespread European practice, tipping didn't exist in early America. It probably got here after American elites traveled to Europe in the 19th century, where they brought the practice back as maybe a way to show others how worldly they were. But it didn't go over well with everyday Americans who felt the idea was dated, classist, and outright un-American. That's why gratuity was insulting, as it still is today in places like Japan. A New York Times editor even said in the late 1800s that tipping had spread rapidly like a, quote, evil insect and weed. Like the Lord Zeftons of the Tudor period, many restaurants posted no tipping is un-American signs in the windows. Some hotel owners even provided staff members with pocketless uniforms to make it difficult for them to accept tips. However, the practice picked up steam during the Industrial Revolution when people began amassing in large urban areas. With more restaurants, hotels, and other businesses popping up, more service jobs became available, and more people had an opinion on gratuity as a practice. Of course, most people sided with taking the extra cash. After emancipation, many black people took service jobs, which is where certain writers and content creators and snooty liberal arts students make their arguments for why tipping is rooted in racism. Of course, although slaves gained freedom, they did not enjoy full rights, and therefore many employers opted not to pay black service workers as a base wage as they were earning tips anyway. That is true. But this doesn't make the act of tipping itself racist. White lords and masters had been tipping white slaves since the 15th century. So where does the tipping disparity come from? Although many of us have been censored from asking why black people don't seem to tip over the years, Cornell University freely approached the subject in a 2006 study titled Differences in Restaurant Tipping, a Literature Review and Discussion of Practical Implications. Professor Michael Lynn, a white man, told the LA Times, quote, "Research indicates that African Americans on average leave smaller tips for servers than whites do, and they're more likely to leave nothing," end quote. Cornell University also confirmed what I already knew, that this wasn't a 100% income issue, because results suggested that blacks tended to tip less even when they reported a higher income status. If it wasn't money, did servers give poor service to black patrons because they assumed they weren't getting tipped anyway, creating a vicious bad service, no tip cycle? Again, the data says no. Black responded admitted to tipping less or not at all, even when receiving good service. So what's the story behind this racial factor in tipping? According to the research, many black people simply weren't aware of the custom, concluding that whites were twice as likely as blacks to understand how tipping works. Still, a third of white respondents also didn't understand how it works either. But I knew there was more to the story. Although relevant, this study is almost 20 years old, and I haven't delivered a pizza in years. I wondered, how does the stereotype shape up today? So I took to the internet to find out, and it's still a hot topic. For example, see this viral video where a black server admits that not only do her black customers fail to tip, but they're often the most demanding customers, making constant requests and complaints.
I love black people so much, but I hate when they come to my job. Like, they never tip. Like, I be going so hard for black people, but never once have I ever had a black table tip me well, like, or like on percentage. Like, maybe once in a while, but like, I just had a table with like 15 people, Hispanic, like Dominican. I heard somebody saying they was Dominican, and then a table full of like black people. It was vibes the whole time. Like, I really gave great service. I always give great service. Do you know they did not tip? The bill was like $600. They did not tip. Like, and then they was doing the most. Like, they was sending stuff back. Like, they was asking for stronger drinks. Like, wanting free stuff, and like, no, like, mad at them. I can't stand serving black people.
The Hodge twins covered this issue a while back as well.
All right, okay.
What is he, a pizza delivery guy?
Yeah, but I'm a delivery driver for Pizza Hut, and I started to notice that I was never getting tipped by black people, so I started adding.
He's probably late, man. I'm telling you, black people are sensitive these days.
So I started adding things up from then on, and out of my last 81 deliveries, 73 of them didn't tip me even a penny. What's up with that, man?
Tom Daniels, host of the Millionaire Morning Show, says he intentionally overtips to make up for the stereotype.
You are not going to make me look bad. I am not going to feed into a stereotype, and I don't care what you say. I don't care if you try to make the argument, well, you know, they should have negotiated for better wages. Okay, cool. I can use that same argument against you when you asking for a government handout. You shouldn't.
And the Black Public Media channel on YouTube interviewed multiple people who enforced this trend.
Black folk don't tip.
Wow, that is correct.
Black folk don't tip. Now this is an interesting one.
I have worked with friends who have been in the service industry in various places, and there is a general agreement that black people don't tip.
Like, I bartended before I started acting, so I've seen this. Your man here is trying to like show off to his girl. He orders Hennessy and apple juice, some crazy concoction. Change? Coins? That's what's left on the bar? Like, how did that happen? Like, how are you calculating?
But Greg Foreman, host of the Black Conservative Perspective channel, identified the real culprit.
I have done stories about the ghetto crowd coming into a restaurant.
It's ghetto black people, not black people, or just ghetto people in general. That's why income levels weren't a factor in the Cornell study and my experience. There are plenty of ghetto people with money, and there's plenty of people of all backgrounds who understand tipping as a concept, yet still refuse to tip.
Come on, throw in a buck.
I don't tip.
You don't tip?
No, I don't believe in it.
You don't believe in tipping?
But generally, this is a cultural issue. Ben Shapiro said it best in this 2020 debate.
Well, 40% of black families have zero or negative wealth. White family worth, in terms of financial worth, is 69 times more than that of black families. Given this disparity, how can you argue that racism is not a driving factor in income inequality?
Because it has nothing to do with race and everything to do with culture. And when you have a culture that doesn't... And when, you know what? Explain to me. You explain to me why black kids aren't graduating high school. Explain that one to me. Explain to me why black kids are shooting each other in rates significantly higher than whites are shooting each other. Explain to me why 13% of the population is responsible for 50% of the murder. Explain to me why the number of black kids in prison, not for innocent reasons, not for walking down the street and getting pulled into a prison, is so high. Explain, if it has nothing to do with culture, explain to me why the single motherhood rate in the black community jumped from 20% to 70% in the same course of time that the civil rights movement has made such tremendous strides. Is America more racist now than it was in 1960? And if it is, please explain to me how that happened.
Anybody can jump in. It's an open mic there.
It has nothing to do with race and everything to do with culture. That's the missing piece. That's what Cornell University failed to illustrate, and that's what the LA Times writers don't mention, and what many people leave out of the conversation. It's the same subculture that equates success, punctuality, and education with being white. It's the same subculture that kills each other by the hundreds each year in cities like Chicago with rampant gang violence. And it's the same subculture that's promoted the 20 million black abortions since 1973. I observed this stereotype firsthand, and an Ivy League study reinforced my experience, as did countless people on podcasts and videos online. Still, for years, I was censored from saying so because it would have been racist. Still, none of this fostered racist beliefs for me because I know the difference between race and culture. Even when a black guy robbed me at gunpoint, I still didn't think to blame, quote, black people. So here's my tip for the folks who felt they lost this election. Stop using black people as a political pawn. Stop perpetuating the negative black subculture by telling them that they're victims and white people in America are systemically racist. There's nothing about skin color that determines how one tips. It's nurture, not nature. That's why Trump picked up the black vote in 2024, and that's why we won. Well, that's going to do it for release 2 of NPC Overrider. I'm your lead engineer, Greg. If you enjoyed today's user story, please do me a favor and set the like button to true. I'd really appreciate it. If you'd like to help save the NPCs, please share this video with your friends. It looks like the algorithms have caught up to my messaging and the throttling has begun. Hopefully that starts to wane as the Trump administration attacks censorship. Also, if you're interested, please hit the subscribe button. We'd love to have you on our development team. And if you have an idea for a future video, go ahead and open a ticket in the comments section. But for now, that's about Beer 30. We're going to go ahead and sign off. Thanks so much for watching. We'll see you on the next release.